2009 flex here. We're going to pull some cam position waveforms with a trigger off of the number 6 coil. We're not going to really go into examining the waveforms. We're just going to talk about how you can move your triggers around and stuff like that to get a better signal. We got the VCMM here. As you can see, I am hooked up to the number 6 signal on the coil there. We're not hooked up to power, we're hooked up to the signal from the PCM. That's going to be our trigger. And then over here, I've pulled both cam position sensors, CMP1 and CMP2. However, on this vehicle, they're buried back down in there somewhere, hard to get to. So pop up the wiring diagram, follow it along, and you find that they both come into this connector. I've just probed it in the back there with 2 little pins that came with the Pico kit because I didn't have long enough pins in the VCMM kit. But let's bring up the screen and see what we're looking at. Alright, hello everyone. Here we are looking at the scope screen now. We're going to talk about changing triggers in order to get a usable signal. Now VCMM does have a nice pre-configured test where you can actually go in and pick. There's a certain amount in there. There's not a whole lot, but there's enough in there to probably get most everything that you'd be doing in the shop. We're not going to use it just for right now because I'm going to show you a manual way of doing it just in case they don't have a pre-configured test for what you are trying to do. So we are looking at the 2 cam sensors, cam position 1 and cam position 2, as well as our signal, this in black here in channel 3, our signal from the PCM for coil number 6. So every time you see a spike there, that is the PCM telling that coil to fire. There are 2 spikes because at idle, Ford vehicles, well, Ford as a company likes to, they call it dual strike. So they like to fire that spark plug twice at idle just to help make sure everything is burning up in there and we're cleaning all the emissions out and the engine's running nice and clean. So that's sort of their thing. That's why you're going to see 2 fires there. That's completely normal. That's okay. This vehicle's running fine. But right now we have a pattern that is currently just, it's got no trigger. As you can see, trigger mode's auto, but we don't have a trigger. We've got nothing set. So what the VCMM is doing is printing a pattern on the screen for us. It's finding the signal, or the voltage, or whatever it's looking at, the voltage, right? And it's updating itself just automatically, just to keep this signal on the screen right now. But we don't have, it would be hard for diagnosis, this kind of pattern, because we can't really catch. I mean, you can. There's a chance that you could catch if something drops out. But it's a bit harder because it's moving. You have to sort of focus your eyes on one spot and then focus your eyes on another and kind of follow all the way through. And it can be a bit difficult to diagnose an intermittent concern. Let's say we have a signal, a cam signal dropping out or whatever. And there's a potential here for it to be missed, just with this data moving back and forth. So how you get around that is you set a trigger. Now you want to set a trigger on something that is repeating fairly regularly and that you know is going to repeat kind of at the same time every time. So in this case, the best thing to trigger on, because these are VRS sensors, you kind of want to avoid triggering on them because they can, I mean, they won't be changing much in this case because we're sitting at idle, but they can be changing. The one thing I would trigger on is, but for this, and one thing, a nice thing to sort of trigger on is an ignition event. Unless you have an ignition fault, which I mean, I suppose you could be chasing. You wouldn't be looking at your cam position sensors in that case, right? It would be in a different side. But for look at these kind of waveforms, triggering on an ignition event is pretty handy because you know it's going to happen, right? It happens in that firing order, 1, 3, 4, 2, 5, 6, or whatever the order is, and it's supposed to happen every single time. So if you trigger on that event, you can print a very, very nice pattern on the screen that's going to reprint itself over and over and over again here and let you watch the other signals for anything that's happening. So how you do that is very simple in VCMM. It's very simple in every or most oscilloscopes I should say. So you have this pattern here on the right here, this configured channel. What we'd want to do is we'd pull up the trigger. We would say we want to apply it on channel 3, because remember we're looking to find the ignition event. And there's already some in here, some data in here, but I haven't set a proper threshold. So what we want to do is trigger on a rising event. So I haven't talked about rising or falling events, but a rising event means that this signal is going up. And that's what we're looking for. So we'll trigger on a rising event. We could say none, really. None. If we wanted to, we could just say, no, don't trigger on anything. No events. It doesn't really help us all that much, I suppose. Let's see, actually. I've never played with this. Let's see if we can get... no, right? See, we said none. We have no event. We have no trigger. We've told that we're not triggering anything. So I've moved... what I did over here is I manually moved my trigger event, right, where I want to trigger on. You can also do it in this little box over here. So 7 amps. Remember, this is an amp clamp that we have wrapped around that signal cable. We're using amperage to look at voltage, kind of, sort of, in a certain way, when we want to trigger on something. So this looks like it's going pretty high. We got it going from, let's move our signal so we can see what's going on here. So we'll grab the signal, we'll put that up there, match that pattern up. Look at those, they sync up pretty nice, eh? I'm not going to get into what this means. That's all about timing and all that business. Camshaft 1, camshaft 2, we can do that another time, or we can figure that out another time, but suffice to say, that's still a little bit over my head as well. Let's just focus on triggering right now. So here you can see we have from 0 to about, I don't know, 8 amps, 8.5 amps it looks like in our wave pattern here, from 0 up to 8. So if we set our trigger to, let's say 6, around 6, 599 amps, we should be able to grab that pattern. It's a pretty consistent pattern from 0 up to 8.5 amps, I should say, a little bit higher on that second strike. And so we want to be able to grab that. We don't want to go too high, because if you go too high on your trigger, you're going to miss it. And if you go too low on your trigger, you're going to miss it. So you want to set your trigger somewhere where you're going to grab that pattern at a good voltage level. I think I said 6. Let's go to 6. A good voltage or amperage level where you know you're going to grab that signal. And we want to go on the rising edge. So right now I have no event. If we click rising, you'll see it now prints that pattern over and over again. So remember, this is still going from right to left. That signal's going that way. But we've told it to trigger on a rising event. I'm a bit confused as to why it puts it down here. Normally it moves that dot and puts it where you need it. In this case, it's just putting it down there. That's fine. I guess it's because it's told the threshold. I don't even know. It's doing a weird thing here, and I don't know why, but it works, so we're okay. So you can see it's printing our pattern now over and over and over again. Sorry, there's children in the background. Printing our pattern over and over and over again. So we have now a steady pattern that we can look at and determine if anything is happening to these two signals. If we have a dropout, it'll be much easier to see. Now this is nothing, just a little bit of noise, that's okay. You can see both patterns look like VRS patterns. They look nice. They both are fairly complementary, right? The waveforms are close to the same. As you can see there, they line up very nice. We have no issues. Like I said, this is a good running engine. So this is just an example of how to move our triggers around. If you did have a problem, it'd be much easier to see now, right? That pattern's printing over and over again. Say we had a trigger wheel, one of the teeth, was damaged, you'd be able to see that dropping out much easier now than if it was flying by as it was before. Just makes it a bit easier, to capture as well any problems that you might see. You also have the ability to move the offset. So you can move that signal around wherever you want if you're trying to catch something different, or you want to see a different part of the pattern. You have the ability, and here you can see we've actually moved this one so far that we can kind of see the other event as well, right? So it's just a way of adjusting things and moving things around so that you can get a better look at what is happening in your pattern, let's say. And you could trigger off the VRS channel if you wanted to. So here we'll set a trigger on the green channel, I believe it was, channel 1. Let's move this down so we can see what we're doing. And let's trigger on, I don't know, we're probably too high here. Let's trigger on 1 volt. 1-ish volts? 0.91 volts, sure. So here you can see now we're triggering on the VRS pattern, and it's not as nice because this pattern, this number 6 here, is still moving by, right? And the reason for this is because if you can see what's happening, if you look at the pattern, can everybody see that? As you're moving, we're telling it to trigger on 1 volt, okay? 1 volt. It was 0.91, let's move it up to 1. We're telling it to trigger on 1 volt. So every time 1 volt comes around in that pattern, it prints a pattern. So there's one on the next peak, 1 on the next peak, 1 on the next peak. So it works, it prints a pattern, but it's still moving. It's not that great. We have multiple 1 volt events happening here. So it's much nicer to trigger on this event down here, the ignition event, because it only happens once. Well, in this case, twice, but that's okay. Even if we caught that second one, it's still going to print a nice pattern for us, right? So that's why you kind of want to trigger on something that is only happening one time, because the other ones aren't going to help you as much. It's going to keep moving that pattern over and over again. It's a bit harder to see. And that's it. That's, oh, actually, no, that's not it. I want to show you one more thing. Up here in pre-configured tests, if you aren't comfortable, or you weren't comfortable with setting up your triggers and messing with all this stuff, and you were doing something that was up in pre-configured tests, easy enough to do. You go up here, you think about, whoops, I clicked the wrong thing. See, valid probe setting, that's not going to work. All right, so you go up here, pre-configured tests. We're working on a 6-cylinder vehicle. It only has intake phase shifting, so only the intake is phase shifted, like the VCT is only on the intake cam in this vehicle, and it is a VRS cam position sensor with 2 wires. You click this button, it tells you exactly what to do, how to set it up, exactly how we saw it at the very start of the video. We've set up into our 2 cam position sensors, we've around our signal wire for our number 6, and then you close this out, and it prints the same pattern that we were looking at. The only difference here is they've set their trigger to 3. I think we had our trigger set to, I don't remember, 6 or something. Doesn't matter. And there you go. So it will put it on. Now, if it doesn't help you if you're in the wrong wire, I'll show you what happens if you go in the wrong wire. As you can see, I just moved that 1 over, channel 2 over, and now we have a completely different wire. So you do need to be aware of what you are probing and where you are probing into. Make sure your pin numbers match your wire colors, because if you don't know what and be sure to remember what you're looking for. We're looking for a VRS sensor. If you go into workshop manual description and operation, it tells you it's got a 3-in-1 trigger on it. So we should be seeing 3 peaks and 1 and then 3 peaks, right? Which is what is happening here. This pattern up here is not what we're looking for, and you could be led astray if you're running into, let's say, engine rough run issues or whatever. If you're in the wrong pins, you're looking at the wrong pattern. It could lead you astray. I know on this vehicle, this was how I originally had it set up, actually, in the wrong pin, and I was looking at this red pattern right here, compare it to the green pattern that we should be seeing, right? Compared to that green pattern, I knew that I was in the wrong pin. I knew something funky was going on there because the engine's running right. If it had this as a signal, it would not be happy, right? It would be setting codes. So remember where you're probing into, remember to pay attention, or especially when you got big connectors with lots of wires. Hopefully you can still hear me, I'm in the engine now. Remember what you're probing into, remember what you want to see on the scope, and you will be good to go. And remember your triggers. You don't have to run with a trigger. In some cases, depending on what you're doing, if the signal is slower or you don't want it to print over and over again, there are some cases where no trigger is useful, but most of the times you're going to be looking for some kind of trigger. That's it, that's all. A little quick tip about VCMMs, and I will see you later.